Hi, this is Victoria, also known as Mrs. Humanities. This is my presentation from TM History Icons. Unfortunately, it was a little rushed at the end there, so I thought I would record it and finish it off so you get the full effect. So what's the issue with marking then? Okay, I've now run several workshops on the 3 pillars of effective marking and feedback, and each time the same issues have arisen during discussions. 2 of the biggest concerns from teachers has been lack of time and the effort put in by the teacher versus the actual impact on student progress. It's from these issues that I feel we need a cultural change towards feedback, not marking. Greater acceptance of feedback in whatever form it takes, providing it moves students on in their learning and progress. Okay, so let's start with the 3 pillars of effective marking and feedback. The workload review on the unnecessary workload around marking has been one of my biggest drivers towards changing the way I mark, assess and feedback. The review highlighted 3 main points. The marking should be meaningful, manageable and motivating for both teachers and students alike. Imagine being a student with 8 or more other subjects, each subject giving you a different target to focus on after each marking session by the teacher. At any one time, students can have a handful of targets to work towards in a short space of time. So I suggest we start a revolution from marking to feedback, where it is accepted that targets can be short-term and long-term, where students are given opportunities to feed forward and act on the feedback that they've been given, making it timely and effective. Firstly, I'd like to start with maximising verbal feedback. There's plenty of research, if you look for it, on the value of verbal feedback in the classroom. It's timely, appropriate and can be acted on immediately by the student. But I always have to question, why do we need to evidence it? Surely the evidence is in the progress made by the student. They shouldn't need to be writing down what the teacher has said, or, we shouldn't be stamping or VFing their books to say it was given. Instead, trust needs to be placed in teachers to believe that they do what they say they are doing. This year I started using whole class feedback, which was originally shared by Mr. Thornton Teach, as a way of ensuring work is assessed regularly and feedback given without having to take the 3 to 4 hours each fortnight or week to mark a set of books. And I can honestly say that it has reduced my workload for each class down to about 30 or 40 minutes. I quite simply look through the work in the books and identify any common misconceptions, spelling, punctuation and grammar errors and next steps that can be acted upon immediately. At present, I write a code for the next steps, both on the sheet and in the students' books, but hope to remove this scaffold as students become better at identifying what they could do to improve. Finally, I identify any particular successes across the class and any exceptional efforts or achievement by individuals. The next lesson I'll present this on the board and students can write down any comments and feedback that are relevant to them. The best part about this is that it actually works really effectively at informing my planning. I can clearly then plan the next lesson to deal with any misconceptions and allow some next steps to be covered within the next lesson or the next series of lessons. Now, live marking, if you don't already do it, I really highly recommend it. Sometimes I simply write comments on post-it notes and I hand these to the students as I walk and assess their work. Other times I use dot marking, where I pop a sticker or a dot with a pen where there are spag errors or other errors, and I get students to then identify and correct their mistakes. Depending on the ability of the students, I might verbalise what it is they should be looking for. This is particularly useful in getting students to proofread their work, to be honest, because the more dots they get, usually the more unhappy they are. Although I have had a few that like to collect the dots. Anyway, another approach is the double tick. This I use in a variety of ways and I'll come back to it a bit further on. But essentially I use the double tick to identify where success criteria has been met. Sometimes I get the students to annotate this and explain why I've double ticked it. Sometimes I'll do it, but generally I like the students to assess and reflect upon their successes. Next is simplifying formative assessments. I think it's really important that actually this is one of the strategies that we try to reduce the workload with, so that we can actually use it to inform our planning. One of the methods I use is RAG 123, which is related to some self-reflection that we also carry out at the end of lessons, and next step marking codes, so that for targets that are very similar and regularly set, I just simply put the code in, and the students then either write that code or refer to the code in the front of their books. Sometimes I also use RAG-rated assessments of success criteria. Quite simply, I shade the box in relation to the colour coding, and then students can work out what they need to work on and improve. I often use this in line with verbal feedback, where I'll go around and talk to the students and say, right, you've done really well at this aspect, however this bit's only shown a good level understanding. Maybe you could add some detail or explanation here or examples to back up what you're saying. Or sometimes in the past I've used feedback stickers that quite simply identify what students have successfully achieved and where they could go next. Quite simply, it's got a variety of success criteria, a variety of targets. I'll tick off what's been successful and highlight any next steps, and then give students the opportunity to act on it. And finally, highlight and improve. This is an example where I wanted students to use more geographical terminology. And rather than writing an extended comment on how this piece could be improved, I quite simply highlighted the areas for improvement, gave a tip as to what I wanted them to focus on, and then gave students the time to act on that in the next lesson. Okay, so that's kind of your formative assessment out the way. Now this is the feedback grid. I've used this mostly for summative tasks. However, it has completely revolutionised my marking and feedback over the last couple of years. I used to find myself marking for hours at a time, usually after school, and was seriously fed up with writing the same things over and over again, which I imagine is quite similar for a lot of you. To overcome this, I started using the feedback grids, and it meant some planning in advance as to what would be assessed and what success criteria I wanted the students to work towards. But it meant that when it came to marking, I was able to have discussions with students there and then in the classroom. It was usually for pieces of work that were over several lessons, which meant that I had lots of opportunity to discuss with students individually. So in pieces of work that would be assessed and would often look at several assessment objectives, it really allowed for clear guidelines as to what would be assessed in the work. And I used them regularly with the live marking, where I would highlight in one colour the successes and pop a star or tick on any criteria I wanted the students to focus on throughout the remainder of the task. Once completed, I could then simply highlight any remaining criteria that had been achieved by the students. Nice and easy, and really timely. Here are some more recent examples I've used in relation to the middle years programme from the International Baccalaureate. Okay, so this is the learning matrix, and this came about at my last school, where they really wanted to make it clear where the students were and where they were going and what they could do to improve. If your school insists on clear progress tracking, this might be an option for you. It does take some forward planning, but it is well worth it. The learning matrix simply breaks down the topic into need-to-know questions, which will be covered over the course of the scheme of the work. And then the success criteria has been broken down into 3 bands. Here I've used bronze, silver, gold, but you could use GCSE grades or levels or whatever else. Each criteria had a code, and I'd write that code in the margin where it had been achieved within the student's book. I'd highlight the criteria in yellow on the learning matrix, and then anything I wanted my students to work on during directed improvement and reflection time would be highlighted in pink. Once they'd achieved it, I could simply tick it off. Constantly, it gave students access to success criteria, it gave them access to my feedback without me having to write extensive written comments in their books. This worked really well with mixed ability classes. Now, when it comes to feedback, I think that making the most of peer assessment is really important. Starting from day one, we need to train students to think about success criteria, to be able to identify errors and mistakes in their work and that of others, and how to feedback constructively. If it's not managed properly, peer assessment, well, it just becomes ineffective and can be usually seen as a time-filling exercise. However, I really don't think it should be that way. Not only do students then learn to check their own work, but they become aware of how others work. Who is better at spelling? They might be able to help them to spell a word, or who might be really good at explaining. And when they don't understand, maybe they could go and speak to that person, because they might explain it differently to how I or the textbook might explain it. It's all about, in my opinion, helping our students become independent learners, scaffolding them to start with, so that by the time they get to GCSE and A level, they have the skills to be able to assess their own work and understand mark schemes. One particular method I've been using this year has been the ACE peer assessment, and the results from this have been really visible, particularly in my Year 8 classes. They're now able to look for successes, errors and improvements with very little guidance from me. Here's an example of ACE in action. You can see that the purple is feedback from the student where they've challenged or asked the student to extend. The pink is where the student has then made improvements to the work based upon their peers' feedback. And then at the bottom of the work is where they then continue to act on feedback. I rarely do peer assessment at the end of a piece of work. Instead, I regularly get students to stop partway through the task, they ACE peer assess and then they return the books. That then gives them a timely opportunity to act on that feedback, to improve what has already been done and to maintain that into the rest of the work that they're doing. For instance, if a student was asked to add some evidence to support what they'd already written, each time they then add evidence in the remainder of their work, they do that in pink pen to demonstrate their action on the feedback given. We also call this Feedforward. I even sometimes use ACE to assess student work, and here's an example of some of my marking. Sometimes I think maybe we should assess by target. After several months, students will have several targets, and instead they should be focusing on meeting those targets before any new ones are given. Admittedly, I've not done this one for a while, but remembered to do it last week just in time for a summative piece of work. I got the students to pick out any targets they'd been given from me or their peers throughout the topic, and any that they had achieved already they dated and ticked off, and the remainder they had to ensure they did in their summative task. I'm still to mark these over the Easter break, but constant reminders to check their progress on their targets I hope has worked. Or sometimes even students select what they want to be marked in formative work. If there's something in particular they're trying to improve upon, we should just mark that. So for instance, here's an example of a student that recognised that they needed to improve their spelling, punctuation and grammar. When it was then peer assessed, their peer gave them some feedback and gave them some words that they'd misspelt to then go away and correct. My last idea is the feedback and reminder bookmarks. I used these in my last school for reminding students of the feedback I'd regularly written in their books. So instead of having to write it in again, I'd pop the bookmark in their book and tell them to see the bookmark. This worked well at reminding students of their targets and what they should be doing within their work. You could also perhaps get them to write the targets at the top of their pages and tick it off when they've succeeded at them. Okay, so from all the feedback, I think it's then really important that these methods are encouraging students to become responsible for their learning. And finally, I think that we as teachers can actually only do so much. At the end of the day, they are the ones that sit the exams and we can only prepare them for them. I personally feel that, students should really have significant opportunities to reflect upon their progress and to learn to assess their work and assess the work of others, and also ensuring that they actually have time to act on that feedback, both in the short term and the long term, so that they can be set on the right path to becoming independent learners that can succeed. And that's why I think that moving away from a system of extensive diagnostic comments and marking everything in books is vital if we are to ensure that the feedback we give students is timely, that they have opportunities to act on feedback, and that they are able to respond to feedback within a short period of time rather than several lessons or weeks later. And without that opportunity, our feedback essentially becomes pointless. If they're not feeding forward, why are we giving feedback? I hope you've taken something from my presentation, and I'd like you just to go away and remember the 3 pillars of effective feedback. It should be meaningful, manageable and motivating for all.